genius. Get onto my show. Welcome to the show, Sidney.
Thank you.
I know you from Orchestra Los Angeles. You're on our board, which is a group that we started a year ago or so, right before the pandemic, which shut down our gala performance. So that whole thing's been put on hold. And that's really as much as I know about you. So, I don't do a lot of research on my guests. So I'm going to start by asking you about your background. Do you come from a musical family? How did this all come to be?
I do. I have two older brothers who all studied music. They started a couple years ahead of me, but all of us learned piano. My oldest brother studied flute, my middle brother guitar. My first instrument was the violin. It was a deeply troubling 6 months. It did not go well. I think for all parties involved, I think everyone would agree that, it did not go well. But my next instrument was piano, did that for a bit. And it's funny, I just shared this story with a friend the other day, where my mom, who had enrolled my brothers in what it's a school known as the Saturday Conservatory for Music, which used to be based out of Cal State, LA, but has been at Lake Avenue Church now since the early 2000s. I'm going to say 2002 or 3. And one day my mom grabbed me by the hand. I was about 7 years old, and she walked me down to the basement, which is where the percussion studio was. She walks me into the room, opens up the classroom, introduces me to the person who would become my first percussion teacher, and says, and I quote, "My son has too much energy. Will you help me?" And the rest is history. That was how I got signed up for percussion lessons. And, luck of the draw, I ended up falling in love with it. And she was right. I did have too much energy, but it all worked out in the end.
That's terrific. I'm sorry to harp on this, but your mic is a little hot now. If you could knock it down a notch. Yeah, I know. This is it's a constant struggle on my end. And it's been a good, COVID has been a good training period for me with this stuff too, and I'm sure with everybody. So everybody understands.
Now that I've got this other mic, and I'm going to switch my sound setting. Hopefully that will help control it a bit. Is that too much?
Yeah, no, it's too hot. Yeah, but it sounds good if you just turn it down.
Okay, a little how about that?
Yeah, good.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Hopefully between the mic and the new settings. So no, it's okay. Normally it's not so twitchy, but we'll make it work. I believe it is.
Yeah. So how old were you when you started? The reason I ask is that I've got an 8-year-old son who's been practicing piano for about a year now. When did you start?
I took my first piano lessons, I want to say 6.5 or so. It was a group piano class, though. So it actually kind of, for us, it worked out because the teacher I had at the time, she was such a taskmaster, even though we were kids. I mean, she ran a tight ship. And so,
was it here in Los Angeles?
In Los Angeles, at the Saturday Conservatory. So it worked out well for me. And it worked out, I think, well for a lot of the kids who went through the program there. Some kids are just very mature and very ready to take on high detail tasks at a very young age. And so I think, if they're ready, they're ready.
Yeah, I don't know if our son is ready, but we make him do it anyway.
Okay.
It's something that I didn't have as a child. I wish that I'd been exposed to piano a little bit more. I mean, not to knock my parents in any way. Everybody does the best that they can. We had a piano in the house, and my grandma used to play the piano, and I used to be kind of mesmerized by it. And then I didn't study music until I was in my 20s, so I feel like I really had to catch up. So you were fortunate that way. So you grew up in L.A., and I'm sorry, do you remember the name of the teacher, the piano teacher, by any chance?
My first year was Denise Kwan.
I see.
And I had her for a number of years, and she taught all three of us, my brothers and I.
And she was probably one of your earliest influences. Yeah. I mean, as somebody that you looked up to back then. Yeah. And then how about percussion? After your mom took you to the percussion basement, what happened from that point on? Did you have an affinity for rhythm and for drums and percussion back then?
I wouldn't say that I did, actually. My teacher, Melvin Lee, or Mel, everyone called him, he was, and it is, it's just, one of the most chill humans period. I mean, because it takes a particularly patient person, I think,
Sure.
to want to teach like young child percussionists. It's a very different energy than young cellists, and young violinists. It's a very different just oral experience to
Sure.
be in the room, whether or not the kids are playing drums or practice pads. I mean, it takes a special kind of just emotional integrity, to be
Yes.
really ready. And also, a lot of like, you have to have control of the classroom. You got to know what you're doing, And for me, I was just always immersed in sounds, and from a very early age, my mom had very eclectic musical tastes. Listened to everything. My dad just listened to smooth jazz for the most part. I mean, he was a like 94.7 The Wave, just
Sure.
one and done, one station for every mood, kind of guy. My mom, she was kind of infamous for these mixtapes that were just all over the place, and it was called peanut butter and sriracha sandwiches. It'd be like one track would be like, Wynton Marsalis plays Hummel, and the next one would be like the early Carlos Santana album, and then it'd be some, Barbra Streisand studio take, and then some polka she had heard, that she thought was kind of funny on the radio, and they would just all be on these mixed cassette tapes, and you never knew what was going to come next, right?
Sure.
And so for me, music was this very just sort of free form experience at home. The idea of genres and sort of specialties and industrial focuses, that was a foreign concept to me that I learned in college. I knew when I set out to make music that like making music meant learning jazz, learning classical. It wasn't even so much learning different styles. It was just like, oh yeah, I want to learn that song, and I want to play like that person, and I want to recreate that feeling and know that sort of culture, and
Sure.
if I'm going to learn Mas que nada, I've got to learn some Portuguese now. So the idea of sort of learning, languages and music, it all just kind of coincided with trying to understand the stuff my mom was putting on the radio.
Sure. Sure. I mean, our kids have the same experience here. We listen to everything from, Prokofiev to Rex Orange County around here. And
Yeah.
my son just loves all of it. He's got a guitar teacher, and he's getting into some Black Sabbath and stuff like that too. And we've got a drum set downstairs, so I understand the patience that it takes to be a parent with a set of drums in the house. And as far as percussionists, do you have any? I mean, there is an elegant way, but I don't like speaking elegantly necessarily. Who are your favorite percussionists and drummers? Who are your big influences now as an adult?
To this day, it's still hard to decide, because I like different players, like, for the same reasons that I like different instruments, and for very different reasons.
Sure.
An orchestral playing, you've got typists like Wieland Weissel, in Berlin, in Germany. You've got, one of my teachers in graduate school, Joe Pereira, is a timpanist at LA Phil, was a big musical influence for me. You just kind of go down the line, the Tito Puentes,
Sure.
as one artist who I met during grad school who really made a big mark on me, Dizu Plaikes, who is a South African percussionist, singer, songwriter, just incredible artist.
Huh.
Left such a mark on me when he and a few artists from South Africa on tour performed at USC. And the director of the education program at the time, Sheila Woodward, had invited a few of the percussion students to join them in this concert. And so we kind of lived with these guys for a couple of days, and we learned from them, and it was sort of short-term, high concentration guru pupil sort of relationship that developed, and was one of the most impactful experiences of my career. And of course, there's no notation. I mean, you're learning everything by rote and through just the physical act of doing it. And it just really drove home the just fundamental human process, this humanity of the music making process that I've always tried to carry into my sort of very classical and sort of systematic music making, opportunities. So
yeah, it's funny how education can take away or I mean, it has the capacity to take away the visceral joy of making music.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with notation or theory, really. It's just about the act of, especially in percussion, the act of moving your body. When I was younger, I had a house with a friend of mine, and we built a soundproof room in the garage. Well, we turned the whole garage into a studio, and There was a band. What was it? Suicidal Tendencies. I don't know if you've ever heard of. It's a local band, and
Definitely.
they used to keep their drums in our garage, and I used to go out there and bang on them all night long. And I think that's probably what prompted me to get my son a drum set, really, so that I could have a drum set in the
Yeah,
house,
yeah, yeah.
I turn on people like what's his name, Vinny Colaiuta, and try to get 7 days under my belt and that kind of stuff. Just
Yeah.
these polyrhythms and stuff. It's just very very difficult. I really admire percussionists, and I've always liked Omar Hakim and um, Phil Collins. I mean, just some of the great
Yeah.
drummers in the past. Tell me about your work now. What is it? What has percussion led you into? Give me your CV here of the things that you've done as a percussionist.
Well, I preface it with, I've been so fortunate, in many ways. LA and the industry at large has been very kind in the opportunities that it's afforded. And so, in the same way that, these very diverse pathways of music, shaped my just fundamental grasp of the art form. My career has led me to be able to participate in a lot of those same paths. And so every now and then when I'm updating my resume or my CV, like I kind of chuckle because, you know, when I look at some of the artists I've worked with, it's just like, yeah, what is the least common denominator there? Like how did all of these things
Right.
intersect? And, from artists like Dizu, who, just said, sure, I'll come to LA and, leave Cape Town for a couple of weeks. And, well, you've got a couple kids you want to play with us? Okay, sure, could be fun. Those kind of projects. And then, working with, composers like, Danny Elfman, who have done a series of projects with now going back to 2013, who I shared the story with him only recently that the first CD my dad ever bought me, this is right when we transitioned to CDs from cassettes.
Hmm.
The first CD my dad bought me was actually the original Men in Black soundtrack, which came out when I was a kid. And so fast forward to a couple years ago, I had the pleasure of recording on Men in Black International. And, it's a lot of the same players who played the original, the first film. And so for me, having these kind of full circle feelings sometimes in the studio, getting to work with some of the same artists who, like so many of us, inspired us to do the work, right?
Sure.
It's been such a joy, and so working with composers like him, was fortunate to do a project with Stevie Wonder a couple of years back. I mean, it's been just sort of this really great and gratifying time of getting to work with a lot of my musical heroes
Sure.
over the last
What would you
years.
say your big break was? When did that happen?
You know, I don't know that there was any one thing. I mean, my first project with Danny Elfman definitely came at a point where I think a number of past projects and sort of the impacts of those projects had all kind of intersected. Because, I think like so many artists who, may perform, record, teach, and, kind of weave together their careers in the ways
Hmm.
that we do, um, you know, there were recording opportunities that led to me getting hired for live shows that led to teaching opportunities that led to, other things. And so I think the first film with Danny, which was back in 2013, was a big one in terms of film recording. But it's such a sort of intricately woven, process that I don't know that there was ever any one thing. I think it was just this momentum that was developed through a series of projects that all happened sort of within a year and a 2 year period that led to different outcomes.
Sure, sure. I've always felt like the gig that you're in is all about getting the next gig, right? It's just being as excellent
Yeah,
and as professional as you can be in the moment to secure whatever comes next. It's so,
yeah,
there's no job security in what we have. I don't know how you feel, but I've been a professional singer for 25 years now, and every year I think, how am I gonna make this? How am I gonna do this? And of
yeah,
course, every year's better than the last, and it's so strange to live in a career that doesn't have a kind of a laid out path
yeah,
for us. Um,
yeah. Yeah. I
how
tell
do
my
you?
students even often that the idea of making it is a loaded concept, and it can often be very self-destructive, right? In multiple ways for freelancers and for full-time employees. I think the idea that there is some gig that allows you to then just sort of rest upon, especially as a creative. I think most of us kind of inherently know that that's okay. Maybe financially, there are some jobs that will afford you more security, but in terms of what will allow you to maintain a sense of both self gratification and exploration and continue your growth as an autonomous human,
Hmm.
like that,
Hmm.
that requires sort of constant self reflection and reinvention, even.
Right.
And so, in the best of all scenarios is a job that gives you safety and is gratifying and, affords you opportunities to experiment. But it's like we have this Venn diagram where you can like pick
Yeah.
two, And so I think one of the big challenges is like figuring out that combination of the gas and the brakes, and also just like knowing how to take care of yourself, in non-artistic ways too. Just like, how do you physically care for yourself? How do you just grow as a person who has read a book or 10? Like, how do
Right.
you just not fully define your existence based on your creative process and your output, and
Right,
so
right. And
yeah.
I think that's the advantage that, I mean, the other side of the coin, oops, I just jostled my mic. The other side of the coin is that we musicians are generally more well rounded because of that, just out of necessity, having to piece together a career or paying the rent when you're just starting out and those types of things. Sorry, my kids are being so noisy. See, you live in a nice, quiet place over there. Um, and anyway, that leads me to my next question. I know that you, outside of being a percussionist and a recording artist, you're also in arts advocacy. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you got involved with arts advocacy and what it entails.
Yeah, the short story in terms of how I got involved is it was kind of a fluke, to be honest. It started as a friend who ended up because of no fault of her own, ended up in need of a new visa because of a sort of freak incident that took place. She ended up having to leave the country, and I basically made a promise at the time that I had no capacity to keep whatsoever. I was about 19 and knew nothing.
Always say yes, right?
Yeah, exactly. I
Can
knew
you do that?
less.
Yes, I know how
Yeah,
to do
exactly. I knew
that.
a little less than nothing about the American immigration process. It just said, look, we'll find a way to get you back. No idea of how that was going to work. But that winter, I had gone to study abroad. I was in London taking some lessons, and basically during the day, I would do all my practicing and sort of musical work, and at night, I would go to the Starbucks up the street and just like use their Wi-Fi and try to kind of scour information on like how to get an artist visa, and as I've told pretty much anyone I've talked to about this, fortunately, I was just a little too ignorant to be as scared as I should have been.
Right.
It actually really played in my favor to just know nothing at this
Sure.
point.
Sure.
And so I just, my 19-year-old logic was like, well, I can't find any info on the internet. So you know what? I'm just going to go to DC, I'll go back home a little early and I'll just see if I can just talk to people. So I just sort of emailed some people at the National Endowment for the Arts and the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities and Immigration Services. And we're just like, can I come by at lunch today and just pick your brain? And in hindsight, I can only imagine how absurd this looked, that this like kid, at the time was just like, hey, so I'm trying to help a friend get an artist visa. Do you know anything about this? And I remember some of the reactions kind of being like, wait, why are you here?
Yeah.
Like,
Who are
wait,
you?
huh?
Yeah.
There's some pianist who wants to come back to community college, but can't. And so you're here. Like, there's some middle ground. You're like, there's other people you could have called, kid.
Sure. Sure.
But ultimately, long story short of this was what I learned in this process was there was very, people, the government representatives I spoke with, felt very little need and saw very little sort of reason to try to help a foreign artist reclaim their status or their citizenship here, because there was so much ignorance surrounding what an artist's impact was economically, socially, culturally,
Mm-hmm.
in the country. And so I made a promise to myself that I also lacked the capacity to keep, which was I said to myself, you know what, I'm not going to go to bed tonight until I can, tell each and every one of these people exactly the ways artists impact the economy, how they impact all the other issues that, this is 2 weeks before Obama's first inauguration. And so I
Right.
went to the White House website and I copied and pasted the issues tab into a Word doc and was like, I'm going to tell them how they affect the military and healthcare and education. And I had no idea what I was doing. And I started, and about 10 minutes into it, I was like, oh no, you're going to have to sleep. This is a long-term project. Yeah, this is not going to be resolved tonight. But what started as this process to try to help a friend get a visa turned into this journey where I was learning all of the sort of problems and loopholes and just issues within the federal arts infrastructure, the ways that, organizations like the National Endowment for the Arts, despite, the objective good they were doing, there were these massive disconnects in terms of the type of policies being enacted, the resources being made available, even the oversight to ensure sort of ethical or an equitable distribution of those funds. And so that just kind of set me off to say, look, there's this bigger issue that I don't feel like is really being addressed in a functional manner. There are some hard soul-searching conversations that we need to talk about in terms of how the country even utilizes the arts to address its problems. Issues of arts organizations that have been really dependent on kind of hollow narratives to achieve their goals rather than designing programs that achieve very strategic, very, tactical ends. And that's how it all started. It was just like, well, maybe it's time somebody figure this out. And then we codify this and we create a system to better prepare the next generation of arts leaders to think in this much more highly specified manner. And so that was how it started. It was not how it began,
Right.
Sorry, that's where it went. It definitely wasn't how it began.
Yeah.
The rest has been just a continuation of that journey.
Now, I can imagine the last 4 years has been kind of a desolate landscape as far as that work is concerned. Do you have any aspirations to go back to DC and work with the current administration?
Yeah, first of all, I never really stopped.
Mm-hmm.
The situation in DC during the previous administration, I knew kind of even before the 2016 election, and I think I told a colleague these exact words, whether it was Hillary, Trump, or the Easter Bunny, there's work that needed to be done.
Right.
And there were a lot of great things that happened as far as cultural policy during the Obama administration, but there were also a lot of great things that didn't happen, and a lot of great things that happened, but not as a result of the Obama administration. And so I knew there were certain aspects of this work that we really couldn't rest on our laurels. I mean, especially on the equity front. But for example, there's been one basic question that's driven my policy work, which is how do we implement artists and arts organizations and all of our cultural capital into a broader range of societal issues? And how do we achieve very hyper-specific gains on those fronts? So, and that means everything from, domestic issues like advancing education policy to economic stimulus and getting more artists back to work and creating an economy that's more conducive to a more stable art sector. But it also means looking overseas and saying, how do we utilize the programs and the narratives and our substantive content to create cultural spaces that are less conducive to the recruiting of individuals into violent organizations like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram? How do we build greater walls against terrorism? How do we build greater avenues for international development and refugee aid? And there are very specific ways to do that, whether that's through expanding the availability of music to be licensed that's, being recorded by artists currently living in refugee camps to, again, so on and so on and so on. And so, so for me, the idea that the Trump administration represented sort of the death of that process was never really a concern of mine, because frankly, there was so far to go, even at the end of the Obama era, that even if, Hillary had won the election, there would have been so very far to go still. So for me, I just turned my focus a bit away from the White House because it was very clear what their stance was on a policy perspective, and used the last 4 years to say, all right, let me work more with organizations on the ground. I'm going to work with state legislators. I'm going to build up relationships with foreign actors, being the UN, being other NGOs operating abroad, and saying, look, when it comes time to have a greater sort of cultural ally in the White House, we'll be ready with this more robust infrastructure. But it definitely wasn't an off season. The
Sure.
wheels were turning pretty, I would actually argue they were turning even faster during the last 4 years than they
Sure.
were prior.
I feel like there's also a kind of a macro problem going on in our culture, and perhaps across lots of the world, and that is that the general population doesn't seem to understand the importance of the arts at all in general. Just the importance of appreciating art and creating art and how it impacts our humanity and our understanding of the world and our place in it. I feel like somebody needs to come along and spend $1 billion just making commercials telling people that art is good. Um, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know how to address that. I think that was one of the main reasons that I wanted to help start Orchestra Los Angeles, was to bring art and beauty to people in such a way that it's easily accessible and understood by an audience that doesn't normally go to the Dorothy Chandler. Just to make it something that's part of being a human being rather than something you put your fur coat on to go see. Anyway, that's a little bit of a non sequitur. I wanted to ask you about you were talking about more equitable circumstances for artists, especially during challenging times, especially, obviously COVID in the last year. How have you managed personally to get through this last year professionally?
Well, like so many, there was a lot of diversifying the portfolio,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a whole lot of wires and cables that are in all of our homes that we probably didn't have this time 12 months ago.
Right.
Everybody, it's just like if you didn't have a home office, you do now,
Yep.
probably,
And a home studio if you're a
home
musician, right?
studios, yeah. A colleague literally sent me a picture. It was this joke picture, but anybody who knows what's going on knows it was a little truth and everything. Was this picture of just like an actual mic set up over his toilet, because he's like, you just got to be ready to go at any point these days. So he's got
Right.
this little bathroom podcasting station, and
Get that
so
wet sound.
yeah, exactly. You got to be ready with all the Foley,
Yep.
wherever
Yep.
you need it. And couldn't afford the FX rig, so you just got to put it, wherever you need. So
Shower curtains, a green screen.
yeah, exactly. So there's been a lot of innovation.
Sure. Sure.
But look, for me, I finished my bachelor's fall of 2008, and entering grad school as the Great Recession was just unfolding.
Sure.
Taught me, I mean, like so many of us, that right off the bat, it just shattered the illusion of any world where the industry could be recession proof, right? And so first things first, there's the closure of programs, and actually, slight aside, when you mention Opera Pacific, my teacher in undergrad used to be your principal percussionist in Opera Pacific, Eric Forrester. So he was my teacher
Oh.
at the time.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, I have a lot of memories of Opera Pacific. Actually, I used to go to some of their rehearsals when I was in school. So maybe I saw you up there
Oh,
actually.
that's so funny.
So for me, I knew up front that I needed to have a plan. And, I was not ready to be taking major auditions at the time. And there were only a few orchestras that were even holding them, for the next 2 years. So auditioning for orchestras wasn't really a thing. Most of the regional orchestras that maybe would have hired timpani plus 3 percussionists were just doing Mozart for a bit. So it was just timpani. So I originally sort of learned the sort of propensity for the industry to shrink drastically. And because of my instrument, there were a lot of strings only concerts, a lot of just woodwind quintets. So, as a percussionist, there was a lot of work that just vanished. And you had these A-list studio players taking church jobs because that was the only way they could work, And the other thing it taught me very quickly was that, it seemed like everyone retreated back to Mozart and Beethoven, right? So it spoke very clearly about what organizations viewed as their like default setting.
Yeah, their bread and butter. Sure.
Yeah. So, when you look at what's the skeletal, what is the skeletal version of your business model? It's the same like 5 composers, And so it taught me very quickly, what the industry, again, viewed as its sort of core service. So fast forwarding to, the recession, like I had already spent, the last, 12 years, carrying that in the back of my mind, because at the end of the
Right.
day, if there's anything I think we all kind of know is that whatever the circumstances, I'm sure most of us didn't think it'd be because of a pandemic, there was always going to be some form of a recession again. Right. And so for me, I one of my other motivations as my policy research began to transform into actual paid employment was, okay, like this is something that, again, figure out the gas and brake combination, which for me manifests in the way of really integrating my policy and performance work. So a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
same organizations that I have partnered with to develop programs, I've also performed for or taught for,
Mm-hmm.
so that should a moment like this arrive, not all of the eggs are in one basket,
That's right.
you know?
And you're making
And
your own work. You're creating your own opportunity,
yeah,
which is something that teachers don't teach you a lot in music school.
yeah. Yeah. And there's a this is more of a physical lesson that I end up talking with my students about a lot, but I came to appreciate the sort of mental and metaphorical aspects of it during the pandemic. Was I always tell my students, the physical arc of your career is one big contradiction, right? So from the first day you pick up your instrument, whatever that instrument is, in our case, sticks or mallets or something, you are constantly in the cycle of building strength and control, but trying to execute everything with a level of relaxation that you only had before you ever developed a muscle. And if you only focus on one, you will either hurt yourself or you'll, sort of exhaust yourself, but you'll never be able to execute things with the technical accuracy that you're perceiving. Your musical vocabulary will be very limited.
Sure.
And so it's not just that the push and pull is part of the process, it's that push and pull is literally the process. Like you have to do both. And during this last year, I thought about that a lot. And I realized how that was also very much true for just the industrial aspects of this too,
Sure.
right? You develop and develop and develop and develop and work and work and work so that you can also not have to do that all the time. Or as one author who I really enjoy, John Lewis Gaddis, is this amazing book called On Grand Strategy that I recommend to everybody. Transform the way I approach strategic thinking. Talked about the Spartans, right? And how the whole concept behind this army was that, you train and train and train and train and train so that you never have to go to war.
Right.
You do all the work so that, you've established yourself as this thing that could, if you needed to, so that people find other ways. You just, so build yourself up so you don't have to do the thing you've been training to do. And so for me, it was, build yourself up so you don't have to panic, build yourself up so you don't have to kind of lose it. Now, I also had the advantage, and I hate to use that word, but I think in just being sort of dispassionate, like, I don't have kids, right? I don't have dependents, right? So for me, the process of just sort of declaring what I want to do or what I can do isn't necessarily being shaped by those obligations. So I recognize much of the world doesn't have that luxury, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I process that and how this pandemic has affected, the world so drastically and dramatically, a big part of this process for me has also been like, look, how do you apply that freedom to being a better colleague, better friend, better ally, better resource for those who are struggling more, and so it's been equal parts this sort of journey where I feel lessons of 2008 have come to roost, but also when I put it in context to the sort of relative freedom that I've been able to have to navigate those career choices, it's allowed me to sort of, I think, be more supportive than
Sure.
I might have been. So
Sure.
it all kind of comes back in a sort of myriad ways.
Well, hopefully we're working our way out of this predicament. What do you have coming up? Do you have anything exciting coming up as far as percussion goes?
There's a film that I worked on that I'm very excited about that is premiering on March 5th on Amazon Prime, which is Coming to America 2. Actually, it's a sequel to Coming to America.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, Jermaine Stagel wrote this amazing score. It's an amazing cast of artists and obviously the actors and musicians. I like the trailer had me like in shambles. I mean, it's just, I think it's going to be hilarious. I think it's gonna be a movie we need,
That's
and,
amazing.
not too soon at all. And so for
Did you
me,
record it during the pandemic?
we did, yeah.
Did you go to location? Did you do it from your home? How did you do it?
I didn't. So I recorded remotely. A number of the musicians did remotely.
Hmm.
I don't want to misspeak. I think some of the strings had a sectional recording. But yeah, a number of us just home studio, same in the tracks, and you know,
Wow,
got it done. So
that's
talk
amazing.
about learning experiences. The remote recording, it's just, as a percussionist, that's one of the things that you kind of have to work through. It's like, okay, where's the gear? Where can I record? For some projects I can record here at home. There's also a studio that I rent that I'll go to for like larger projects, because for the most part everything's great. But there is, every day right around 5 to 5:30, there's this guy who has desperately needed a new catalytic converter for about 6 months. Like goes down my street, and every day somewhere between 5 and 5:30, the same car alarm goes off, and that
Sure.
person always parks right outside. So I've literally built a window into my like project recording schedules for that alarm, because I know he goes by every day. It's pretty routine. So like I'll schedule my dinner breaks between 5 and like 5:45, just to leave, So what I don't want to necessarily leave a window for car alarms, you got to get out and do things. But so far it's worked out. And again, I've been very fortunate in terms of, one, work that has still come my way, but also, having a space to create and to be able to record and to be able to still produce, products at the level of, submissions for film and TV work. So that's its own other sort of journey on
Yeah,
top
and
of it all.
that's been kind of the silver lining, I think, in this whole thing for lots of different professional sectors, not just musicians. But I think there's a paradigm shift coming as far as going to the office every day, 5 days a week is perhaps a thing of the past for a lot of people, musicians included. We've all learned how to. I submitted, and my wife submitted vocal tracks for the LA Opera Gala a few months ago, something that we obviously normally do live. And I think a lot of people have accumulated the right amount of gear to turn in really high quality recordings. And I love it. You don't have to put on pants and you can do something great.
Yeah.
Like right now.
Yeah. I mean, wait, do you have pants on?
Well,
I didn't
we
think
got
that
the
was
memo about the jackets,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
the pants were, yeah, I just left that up to you.
Yeah.
Well, Sidney,
Yeah.
it's been great. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think you're so interesting and such a light in our local musical landscape, and really somebody to look up to. And I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate being a colleague of yours, and I call you a friend, and I'm very proud of that. So thanks for
Yeah,
being on the
likewise.
show.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you for having me. Thank you for hosting this. And there's no way to be too connected right now. And
That's
so I
right.
think every pathway to just keep seeing each other, and keep
That's
hearing one
right.
another, and just
That's
keep
right.
remembering we're out there and we're doing it. And it's so important. And
That's right.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And yeah, I
Well,
look forward to doing it in person. But in the meantime, this has
I
been
know,
great.
sooner than later, I hope, right?
Yeah.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you later.
I mean,
Thanks
be well.
again.
All
All
right.
right, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Genius, it takes a lot to get on my show. Genius, you're probably someone we'd like to know. You're really good at stuff, you probably like to dance. You like long walks and you wear clean pants. Genius, get onto my show.